Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. Today I'm going to be working on my Portulacaria afra forest. In nature, the Portulacaria afra is more of a bush type form than a tree form. So I'm styling these trees to look like the mighty Baobab trees that grow in Africa. It's been almost 2 months since I last worked on this Portulacaria afra forest, and my goal was to put it in the club show for this fall. So I've been letting it grow for the last 2 months, and it's due for its pruning again. I don't want to get it too wild. I want to keep the foliage masses quite tight, build ramification, so it looks good in fall. Today, I'll be pruning up my Portulacaria afra forest, and I'll also be working on my Tiger Bark Ficus planting. I'll be painting the display stand and finishing the ground covering in the bottom of the tray. Let's get out the pruners and start today's work here in the bonsai zone. Before I start working on the pruning of the trees, I'm going to clean up any weeds and any moss growing up the trunks of the trees. Having a layer of moss on the surface of the soil is a great way to control weeds, but there's always a couple of them that pop through. I always try and pull the weed and the roots out. That one worked. Another one over here. I'm also going to clean up some of the moss that's growing up the trunks. It could cause your tree to rot out if you get too much humidity at the base. In nature, this would be shaded out by the tree, so you wouldn't get any grass or anything growing up near the base of a tree anyway. The moss is getting quite thick in this planting. It's even growing up on the rocks. Kind of reduce the moss. I think, we're not after a lush look to this planting. So I'll leave patches of moss, but not the whole planting. I really like how the moss is growing around some of these rocks. It looks very lush. But that's not the look we're going for in this planting. I want this to be more of a dry desert type landscape, so I'll leave a little of this moss on, but not all of it. It just looks too much. I just noticed that the one rock in my planting here is completely covered with moss. You can't even see the rock. Not much point having a heavy rock in your planting if you can't even see it. I'm removing a lot of this moss in here. It's just getting really thick. I could prune it down, but I don't want moss going underneath the canopies of the trees. It just doesn't look right. I'm just getting started with the moss removal. You can see how much I've removed already, just in this one little spot. I've got the landscape cleaned up now. If I were to put this forest into a show, I would have to spend probably another 3 or 4 hours finally detailing the landscape, which is really fun to do. But for now, this is good, so we can start with the pruning of the top of the trees. In the last video on this forest, I was pruning the overall profile to sort of a rounded asymmetrical triangle, the highest point being above the main tree here. And I was tapering the forest back so the trees in the background are smaller and look more miniature to give a forest perspective to the planting. So I'm going to continue with that theme when I prune this time. I'm going to start by pruning the main tree down, getting rid of all these long shoots that are sticking up. With clip and grow bonsai, you've got to let the tree grow. At least this has got 1, 2, 3, 4 pairs of leaves on it. If it weren't going into a show, I might even let it grow longer. But 4 pairs is good. And then I'll prune it back to the first 2 pairs of leaves, or the second set, depending what direction the leaves are facing. Not all the shoots on this tree have the same amount of vigor, so these long, vigorous ones will get pruned back, and some of the smaller ones that are just developing, I won't be touching them at all. It's always best to prune a little high at first. You can always reduce it down further But if you pruned it back too far, you can't prune up higher. I think by the end of summer, this forest is going to be quite compact. It'll have quite a dense canopy on the top of the trees. I finished pruning up the main tree. This tree was the start of this forest. I bought this as a small cutting and I propagated it. So all these other trees in this forest are just cuttings off of the number one tree here. With the main tree pruned up, I've established the highest point in my asymmetrical triangle. So I've got to kind of prune all these other trees to a nice curved asymmetrical triangle profile, and the back one's shorter for perspective. As you're pruning your forest, you want to step back from it and check the progress from the distance every now and then to make sure you're doing the right thing. When I'm pruning these canopies, I'm not just pruning the top of the canopies, but I also have to prune the underside. I don't want a whole bunch of leaves from this canopy blocking the tree behind me. So I'll have a canopy of leaves up here, but I want to strip away all the leaves on the underside of the canopy. So when viewed from the front, you can look through this tree and see the smaller tree behind. So I'll be removing a lot of these lower leaves, especially in this area. You can see on this one, this foliage is way too low for the canopy of this tree, and it blocks the view of the trees behind. I've got my profile roughed in from the front view, my highest point here, tapering down to the edges here. And I also want to do that from the front to the back. So I'm going to swing the tree around and start working on the back trees, making them as short as possible, and then working on that transitional curve from the highest point to the lowest point at the back. Here's a side view of the forest. This is my number one tree up here, my highest point in the forest. And these are the back trees. So I've got to make the back trees as short as I can get them, and then do a curve, transitional curve from my back trees, rounding up to the trees that are more forward. So here I go. I want to make these back trees as short as possible. I've got the back trees about as short as I can get them without pruning down into the woody parts of the tree, leaving no foliage. So now I've got to make that transition from the shortest trees at the back to my trees near the front. So pruning off anything kind of sticking out of that rounded profile. I've got the tops of the canopies pruned up now, left to right, front to back. So now I'm going to go in and clean up the undersides of the canopies. I may have to go in and clean up some of the trees in this area. It's getting quite dense. Yeah, it's really hard to see some of the trees in the back. There's so much foliage down low on some of these trees in the front here. So yeah, cleanup required in this area. To clean this area up, I can remove any of the larger, older leaves off the trees. On this tree, the canopy is up here, but I have some branches that start too low on the trunk, and they'll have to be removed entirely. Like that. And there's another one down here. And I just make sure the cut's smooth by carving it with my fingernail. That's pretty good there. I've got the Portulacaria afra forest all pruned up for today. There's still a lot of work to go on this forest, getting all the details sorted out. I will be repotting it this summer, so probably midsummer, and I might be tweaking the positions of some of the trees. So that'll be coming up. The Portulacaria afra forest will be in a growing phase now,
So I'll probably let it grow a month or two and then prune it back again. I'll put the forest back on the bench now and we'll get out the Tiger Bark Ficus. I've got the Tiger Bark Ficus out now. I'm going to be painting the columns here to match the cement color that I have on the pot. I'm going to be planting moss and gravel underneath to give a realistic ground cover. And I'll be painting the outside of the tray with probably a different color, probably black or something. So we'll be pruning up the tree also. All these new shoots are coming out now, so I can select which ones I want to keep and which ones I need to get rid of. Ones that are crossing, growing in the wrong directions, I'll cut those away. So sort of set the structure up for the future of this tree. So overnight I'm going to prime the base and try and get as much painting as I can do on it. And we'll come back for part 2 of pruning the Tiger Bark Ficus. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me here today in the Bonsai Zone.